When taking on the role of writer and director for Warner Bros.' The Batman, Matt Reeves found himself in a particularly difficult position. How do you take a character with a story everyone knows by heart and make it into something new and exciting? It's fair to say that in past attempts to tell the story, other filmmakers would typically take the opportunity to just simply retell Batman's origin story in the same way it's been done many times before. But after seeing the movie a few times, Reeves, I think, managed to come up with an idea that feels fresh and something we haven't seen on screen before. To me, what makes the Batman work as well as it does is the downright ballsy approach Reeves took with the character of Bruce Wayne, and the way he managed to implement that approach to the Caped Crusader's infamous story. But before we talk about any of that, let's first talk about
Plectrum.
As the face of grunge rock in the 90s, Kurt Cobain, frontman of the band Nirvana, embodied an entire generation of anguished young adults and outcasts, ones who were all very much lost, bored, bitter, and condescended to by the world around them, and had no way of coping with really any of it. The music Nirvana made captured those raw emotions that generation felt. Nirvana succeeded in making something that could be felt and truly understood by anyone even outside of that generation. And while Nirvana certainly wasn't the only band making music like this at the time, in fact Cobain even hated the idea of calling himself the voice of a generation, their music stood out in a special way that helped them dominate the entire genre of grunge and made the band the legends within it. The songs were dark, abrasive, and had an edge to them, but they were also ones that bled empathy and well-articulated emotion. And it was that articulation that made every song feel like a heart-to-heart conversation between the band and their loyal audience. And many fans took refuge in that conversation Nirvana had with them, which helped them make the most influential and beloved bands of all time. But unfortunately, there is another side to Nirvana's legacy that I believe has a far bigger impact on people's perception of the band. During the height of his fame, Cobain really struggled with the pressures of everything that came with it. That pressure, coupled with crippling mental health problems and a debilitating drug addiction, caused Kurt to begin to lose himself and only left him to fall into his worst tendencies. Ones that not only put him at odds with his own band, but would exacerbate his marriage with singer Courtney Love, who was also just as troubled as him. His drug problems were even so bad to the point where he and Love almost had their own infant daughter taken away from them. Any attempts at rehabilitation were only coupled with setbacks and relapses, and even resulted in a failed suicide attempt. But any bit of help from family and friends simply wasn't enough to quell his demons.
Hi, I'm Kurt Loder with an MTV News special report. The body of Nirvana leader Kurt Cobain was found in a house in Seattle on Friday morning.
Found beside the body.
It was discovered by an electrician who had showed up at around 8 a.m. to do some work at the house. He looked in a window and said he recognized the body on the floor as Cobain's.
This series of events would eventually lead to the unfortunate day of April 5th, 1994, when Kurt Cobain took his own life at the age of 27. And in one swift action, an entire generation of loners and outcasts were devastated. Not because they had lost a voice that represented them, but because for many, it only confirmed how hopeless their life truly was. And while I don't believe Cobain's death can ever take away the empathy that lived in Nirvana's music, it did, however, leave behind a tragic image of self-destruction that would always consume it. And it was that image that helped Reeves envision his version of what Bruce Wayne should be. In interviews, Reeves spoke about his process of listening to music while writing, and during the development of Batman, he started listening to Nirvana's music. And through the band's music, he particularly found himself modeling Bruce after Kurt Cobain and what his image represented. Imagining him not as the billionaire playboy by day and the crime-fighting symbol of justice by night, but as someone who had succumbed to the pressures of his duties as Batman and as a result, becomes a dark and twisted embodiment of fear and vengeance. But during the process of writing and listening to Nirvana for inspiration, Reeves found himself drawn to one song in particular, one that would be the driving force of not only the film's main character and his arc, but the tone of the world the film takes place in. This is Something in the Way, the final track in Nirvana's 1991 album, Nevermind.
Underneath the bridge.
In the song, Cobain quietly and mournfully plays the part of someone who has secluded themselves under a bridge and away from civilization, with only the broken tarp above their head and the animals they've trapped. The narrator solemnly sings about this sense of isolation and despair that was either unexpectedly thrown upon them or self-imposed. Accompanying Cobain's whispered vocals and the band's understated instruments throughout the song, a cello plays in the background, giving the song an eerie, mournful tone, almost as if this isn't a situation the narrator will come out of, but instead consume their final moments of life. And to them, there's something inside of them that tethers them to this moment, and that ultimately there's nothing left to do as they wither away. There's no mincing words here. Something in a Way is a bleak song about feeling hopeless and seeing no way out of that, while slowly realizing that this is just the new normal. And it was one that Reeves found himself constantly thinking about when crafting the Batman, and the world we find ourselves in during the film's opening moments. The use of the song paints a picture of everything we need to know in the beginning.
Yeah. Kid found him.
A child is being questioned by police about what will surely be the worst moment of his life. Where moments earlier, the child stumbled upon the lifeless body of his own father, the mayor of Gotham, after being brutally murdered by the Riddler. As he's being asked questions about this, the child looks up and sees a dark and mysterious figure outside of the room, sternfully looking his way. Now, this is a moment in any other movie where the hero would see the child's look of hopelessness and desperation and return to them a look of reassurance to just simply let the kid know that this is going to be okay, you will be okay. But that's not what's happening here. Our hero only sees this now fatherless child as a stark reminder of his own failings. After 2 years of watching over Gotham as Batman, Bruce Wayne has only seen the city descend further into darkness. Whatever good Bruce's vigilantism came from in the beginning is only starting to wane and take its toll on him, to the point where he finds himself only existing during the night as Batman, while slowly losing every ounce of himself in the mask. A mask that has become a symbol of not hope and justice, but fear and vengeance.
I'm vengeance.
Criminals are terrified of his existence, sure, but it's not enough to quell the chaos within the city. And Bruce is tired of fighting night by night, knowing that it's had no effect on the city. But he still fights to ensure that his own late father's hopeful aspiration stays alive, despite knowing that it's a losing battle. The use of Something in the Way in this moment drives home the point of just how hopeless everything in Gotham City has become, while letting us not only see, but feel how far Bruce has fallen in his crusade to preserve his family's legacy, and how this drive to do so has poisoned him over time. But here's the interesting thing about the film's use of Something in the Way. It's used not only once here in the beginning to dictate the film's bleak and desperate tone, but during the film's ending as well. And Reeves' use of it at the end does something interesting during a pivotal moment in Bruce's arc. After the mayor's death, a chain of events is set off by the Riddler as Bruce begins to discover clues and riddles he's left behind. These clues lead Bruce throughout the criminal underbelly of Gotham, where he discovers just how much corruption has bled through Gotham. Politicians, the police, and other people responsible for protecting the well-being of the city are all discovered to be part of the criminal system as a response to their greed. Their surrender of ethics and responsibility leaves the mob as the rulers of the city. And the further down the rabbit hole Bruce goes, the more bodies of corrupt city officials begin to turn up. These riddles even lead Bruce to discovering the sins of his very own family, only making him doubt his mission to save Gotham even more. And it's this series of cascading events that forces Bruce to reevaluate who he is and why he became Batman in the first place. He constantly references his family's legacy and how he's trying to save Gotham, but in reality, it's never been about that. Instead, he's unknowingly used Batman as an outlet for his own pain and trauma, a way to fight back against a force that took his family away under the guise of vigilantism. And the deeper he's gone into his own revenge fantasy, the more he begins to leave behind not only the loved ones who've been there for him throughout everything, but the ones his parents always fought for until the day they passed away. The people of Gotham. But it's this moment when Bruce finally catches up to the Riddler that leads him to discovering a much more shocking conclusion, that him and the Riddler are one and the same. Staring back at Bruce is a reflection of everything he has become and what the image of Batman has come to represent. Inspired by Batman's symbolism of fear and vengeance, Riddler has crafted his own identity and image to exact revenge on those who greedily thwarted plans of political change that would have helped not only the city, but the people like him. It even horrifies Bruce to learn that, despite their many similarities, the only thing that kept him from becoming someone like the Riddler is the fact that he grew up in a place of privilege and support, while the Riddler grew up alone in horrid conditions in an orphanage where his rage only festered, becoming twisted and delusional to the point where he even believes Batman has been helping him carry out his plans the entire time. Suddenly, everything that Batman has stood for in the last few years quickly becomes the city's reckoning, as the Riddler's followers begin to attack the city in a warped effort to cleanse it. Bruce's fear of not knowing if his presence has had an effect on Gotham ironically has come to an awful boiling point.
Who the hell are you?
Me. I'm vengeance.
And he knows that in order to become the hero Gotham needs, he has to start the process of letting go all of his pain and who he's allowed himself to become. This moment of change in Bruce leads us to something in the ways of reprisal. Gotham, now surrounded by the aftermath of the Riddler's actions, has reached its lowest point. A power grab within the city's criminal underworld is about to begin. The streets are flooded, looting has begun, and many are left injured or dead. And while help is coming, it won't come in time for everyone. As Bruce conveys in his final monologue, things are going to get worse before they get better. But here, something's changed. Bruce carries a hurt woman to the National Guard medics, and as he begins to let go of her to help others, she grabs his arm and refuses to let go. And this moment almost shocks Bruce. For the entire movie, he's prided himself on hiding in the shadows and causing fear to criminals, but in turn, he's become a symbol of fear to the people of Gotham and has had everyone cast doubt upon him. And this feels like the first moment someone has ever looked up at him as a symbol of hope. And it's jarring to him, and in response, he simply gives her a look of reassurance, one that says, "It's okay. You'll be okay." And after this moment, I want you to hear what happens to Something in the Way as it plays in the background. Those mournful cellos I mentioned earlier that portrayed hopelessness begin to flutter and subside, and instead give way to strings of violins, and soon the song disappears altogether. A way to communicate that things in Gotham are still bad as ever, and even in some instances worse. But it's not the end. Perhaps there is something better on the horizon. I think when Reeves said he found inspiration in Nirvana and Cobain, it wasn't just from Cobain's tragic image. While it was certainly a jumping off point to set the stage for the story, there was always something more to this choice. Instead, I think he looked deeper and found that empathy and emotion that still lives in their music. He found inspiration from a group that created art for those who had been left behind by the world and reassured them that it's okay. It's bad now, but you're not the only one. And that's a cathartic moment that can even be found in a bleak song like Something in the Way, a song describing a certain moment of hopelessness that, at the end of the day, we've all felt in some way or another. But it's important to remember that it's just a moment, one moment out of a million that we will endure throughout our lives. And the song, I believe, is a reminder of not only this, but a reminder that we remain in that moment when something we have felt or experienced stands in the way of making it to the next one. And instead of letting it poison us and our view of the world, we have to create meaning out of it and use that meaning to keep going. And I think there's something beautiful and important in that reminder, especially for a superhero as human and vulnerable as Batman.